All right, good morning, guys. I hope you had a nice long weekend. If you celebrate Easter, I hope you had a wonderful Easter and you were able to get outside maybe a little bit over the weekend. Today we're going to be going through measures 90 through 105 in Winter Palace. It's really exciting. There's only 2 sections to get through after this, so I'm excited. I hope you're excited. And we get a little bit of a break. This part is definitely, in my opinion, less challenging than some of the parts that we've seen so far. It goes back to that andantino quarter note equals 88 tempo. So without further ado, check the timestamp below in the description box, click on the one for your section, and let's get started. Okay, first violins. So, like I said, this part I don't think is going to give you very much trouble, but I do want to point out a few things. In this 16th note section at the beginning, it's basically the same pattern that lasts for 2 measures that's played almost 4 times throughout here between measures 90 and 98. I'll just point out one thing, make sure you're playing B flat, low 2 on the G string, and then in the second measure of each phrase, that B goes to a B natural, and that lasts for the whole measure. Always make sure that you're making appropriate decisions regarding 4th finger. For instance, the last note of the first measure of each phrase, so for instance measure 90, that D, definitely use a 4th finger because you're going back to a note on the G string, but then the last note of the first beat of measure 91, I would use open because you're going up on the D string. Other than that, I think all of these 16th notes can be played in first position. I don't see any reason to do anything more complicated than that. Following the 16th note section, we go into this really beautiful, I think kind of haunting melody, and I would play this in 3rd position starting from the E flat in measure 98 and just maintain 3rd position all the way through the end of this section. Let's talk a little bit about articulation and phrasing. This whole section is very, very soft. You start out mezzo piano, decrescendo at the end of the second phrase to pianissimo. Then you come back up to mezzo piano for that melody in the 8th notes and quarter notes, decrescendoing to pianissimo. So it doesn't get above mezzo piano for this entire section, which I think is really interesting. As far as articulations go, at the beginning of this section, he gives us sempre détaché, which means always detached or always détaché, which, when you're doing 16th notes like this, is going to come across, I think, a little bit as more or less a brushstroke. So put these notes in the middle of the bow and let them come off the string just ever so slightly, or maybe not even off the string, but just release the weight at the end of each stroke so that you get that nice detached feeling without an actual spiccato or staccato that would be more separated. And then in this little lyrical section at the end, I would say go ahead and play it legato. Make sure that you're using the correct bow distribution, which in this case would be the run bunny, so whole upper half, whole lower half, or a modified version of that that uses less bow to take into consideration the dynamics. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for phrasing within this section. So think about, for instance, in measure 98, you have B flat as a pickup, and then E flat, F, G, you're going up, so I think leading to that G, and then F, D, B flat, going back down, you can relax a little bit. So even though there's not any real shaping dynamics except for that decrescendo at measure 101, I think that we can really add a lot here and just use what you know about the rise and fall of phrases and notes to make those decisions. That's about it. Watch your accidentals. Like I said, those high and low 2s, there's a lot of changes where that's concerned, and of course the E flats and B flats. But other than that, I'm going to set my metronome at quarter note equals 88, and we'll play through this. 2, ready, and okay, that's it. Have fun practicing, and I will see you back here tomorrow for the second to last part. Second violins. So I don't think this part is going to give you too much trouble, but it is really interesting. So you guys start out at this andantino section at 90 with this kind of haunting, beautiful melody with quarter notes and eighth notes. And meanwhile, the first violins have running 16th notes. And later you guys switch and you guys pick up the running 16th notes and they have this melody. So it's really a beautiful and kind of intricate section, even though it may not be as difficult to play as some of the other stuff that we've been doing. So first of all, at pick up to measure 90, this andantino section, I want you to play all of this melody in third position. Make sure that you're dividing your bow appropriately, so lower half whole, upper half whole, that kind of a thing, the run bunny, or a modified version of that that doesn't use as much bow but is still distributed the same way if you're trying to reflect a quieter dynamic. When you get into the 16th notes, it says sempre détaché, which means always detached. With the tempo that we're going, playing 16th notes, if you put these notes in the middle of the bow and let them bounce just ever so slightly, not necessarily a spiccato, certainly not a spiccato, but let them release at the end of each note, you'll get a nice gentle détaché that doesn't turn into a spiccato or a harsh staccato. Be mindful of all of the accidentals through here. I'll just point out you've got B flat in your key signature, so in measure 98, just make sure you're playing a low 2, but that does go to a B natural in the next measure in similar phrases. Also make sure that you're making smart decisions as far as fourth finger, so if you're continuing on the higher string, use an open, but if you're going back to a note on the same string, use a 4. And then finally, I'll just make a note about the dynamics. This entire section is incredibly soft. You start out mezzo piano espressivo, so since it's the melody and since it says espressivo, the mezzo piano is going to be more of a feeling than necessarily an actual dynamic. That is to say, it's still going to be quite soft, but it needs to be present and heard. So you're going to use a lot of vibrato, you're going to use a lot of bow, but you're going to make sure that you're maintaining the feel of that gentle mezzo piano. Then you decrescendo all the way to pianissimo, and stay within piano or pianissimo for the entirety of the rest of the section. Other than that, I would just say make sure that you're paying really close attention to the accidentals through here. Start out slowly if you need to. I'm going to set my metronome at quarter note equals 88 and play through this. 2, 1, and 2. One thing I noticed while I was practicing is that in measure 97, there's a bow lift written in there with a down bow on the E flat. So you will need to cut that C a little bit short just to both shift to first position and also actually put your bow in the middle where you're going to get that nice détaché. Okay, I hope you enjoyed practicing this part. I will see you back here for the next section tomorrow. Okay, violas. So this section here may not look terribly interesting, and maybe it's not to play, but it's very important nonetheless. So the violins 1 and 2 are alternating between running 16th notes and this kind of haunting, beautiful melody with quarter notes and eighth notes. And you guys and the cellos and the basses are just doing these plain half notes, double stops. And I think this is a really good moment to explore a kind of no vibrato, open string, a drone effect. Just the way that it's set up, I think it lends itself really well to that. So we are going to do all of this non-divisi for the violas and no vibrato. So when you can, use an open string, and when it may be more comfortable to use a fourth finger, you can use a fourth finger but still keep it with no vibrato. Make sure that all of your B's are flat through here. It's in the key signature, just in case you forgot, make sure you're using low 2s. And then definitely, I think the last note, that dotted half note G, we're going to go ahead and play open. So like I said, maybe at first glance not the most interesting thing, but I think in modern music, composers tend to explore different textures, and it's more about, in some instances, I think it's more about the textures, and certainly in this piece, as we've seen, about the rhythms, than it is about the difficulty of the notes or these virtuosic runs or anything like that. I'm going to go ahead and set my metronome at quarter note equals 88, so make sure that you're thinking in terms of quarter notes now instead of eighth notes like we have been previously. So this is going to have a very different feel rhythmically. It's in a straight 4/4 and much slower than how fast we've been going. Oh, and I almost forgot to mention, so throughout this whole section, it's very, very soft. At the beginning, mezzo piano to support the melody and the second violins. Then you go down to pianissimo, back up briefly to piano, back down to pianissimo for the rest of this. So think about using the edge of your bow hair and going very close, if not a little bit over the fingerboard. Maybe not all the way over the fingerboard, but certainly as light as you can get it for this drone section. 2 and go. Okay, and that's all there is to it. I am probably getting overly excited about this section. I really love it. I think that it sounds very expansive. It brings images of, like, I don't know, landscapes and stillness, but it's interesting because it's juxtaposed against this very busy running 16th notes in the violin section. So I don't know, I really think it's brilliant. I think when you're playing this, you need to be focused on getting those intervals perfectly in tune when you have like the D and the G, just to make sure it's nice and pure. That's about it. Happy practicing, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for the next part. Okay, cello bass. So you're probably looking at this section thinking that it looks like the most boring thing that you have ever been asked to play. However, I kind of just nerded out about this when I was talking to the violas, so I might as well do it again. I love this section. I think it's brilliant. Basically what's happening is the first and second violins are alternating between running 16th notes in this very chromatic, non-melodic pattern and this beautiful haunting melody of quarter notes and eighth notes. Meanwhile, cello bass and viola are just doing this very still, chords, you know, half notes and whole notes with almost no dynamic change. I just think that it is lovely because it really plays with textures. Like I was telling the violas, I think that in modern music that sometimes composers will experiment with more than just notes. They'll experiment with rhythms, obviously, as we have seen in this piece, and they'll experiment with texture. And I think that this is such an amazing experiment with texture. So in the spirit of that, we're going to do a couple things. Number one, no vibrato for this entire section. I think that it's going to kind of emphasize what's written on the page. So no vibrato, open strings every time you get a chance. In the spirit of the kind of, you know, bagpipe type drone, if a bagpipe could play pianissimo, which it can't. Cellos are going to be non-divisi, so all of these chords you're going to play. Basses, we are going to do divisi, and then basses in those two measures where you have the note that's out of your range, the low C, that would be measuring 91 and 95. What we're going to do is take the low C, bump it up the octave, so it would be the C on your A string. That note is going to be played by the outside person, so we're going to treat that as an upper note. And then the printed G is going to be played by the inside person. So for instance, if you're an outside bassist, 90 and 91 would go open G, open D, and then C on your A string. If you're an inside bassist, 90 and 91 would go C, G, and then G again. Okay, and that happens again in 94 and 95. Oh, and also 97. Sorry about that. So cellos. This is actually going to take some practicing unless you're already really comfortable playing fifths. You've got, for instance, you're starting out with a fifth, so you're going to have to play fourth finger across two strings. If we really get to a point where it's just not in tune, I'll break down and we'll divide it. But for now, I think it's really in the spirit of the part to play it non-divisi. So do your best with that. Other than that, I'll just point out the dynamics. You never go above mezzo piano here. So you start out mezzo piano, drop down to pianissimo, piano, and then pianissimo again to the end of the section. So really focus on maintaining tone. It's easy to get kind of a thin, not so great tone when you're playing this softly, especially with longer notes and for this long period of time. So really focus on tone, really focus on intonation. I would be playing close to the fingerboard for this whole section and focus on not doing vibrato. You guys are amazing players and you have wonderfully developed vibratos, and sometimes that can be our worst enemy because it's hard to get rid of it. But I think that contemporary classical music really challenges us to go outside of our comfort zone, and we're going to try to do that here. Okay, other than that, I'm going to go ahead and play through it. I'm going to play through it with the double stops on the viola so that you can hear what that's going to sound like. But basses, just know that you'll play it divisi. Okay, here we go. Quarter note equals 88. 2 and go. So a section like this, as simple as it may look, can really pose a challenge. I would certainly need to practice it a little bit more on this viola before I was comfortable playing it in concert. So I just challenge you to really pay attention to your tone and intonation and actually enjoy this section. I think it's very thoughtful and kind of meditative. So anyway, happy practicing, and I'll see you back here tomorrow for the second to last part.